Annenberg Media.
This is my playhouse, Monster said.
We want it.
Oh! 100 is a
Reading is intrinsic to everything children come to school to learn.
large amount.
What are you going to predict Chapter 2 is going to be about?
Teaching reading presents many challenges and choices.
What pops up as a concern or a question? What do you struggle with?
A lot of children love to choose books that are way more difficult than they can handle. At what point do you draw the line and tell them that that's not okay?
In this 8-part workshop series, join Professor Jeannie Parator of Boston University and 12 K-2 teachers as they explore critical issues in literacy instruction.
When we look at the research on children who are struggling as readers, one of the things that we find over and over and over again is that children who struggle spend less time reading.
Lectures share current research on topics ranging from word study and writing to assessment and differentiating instruction.
In the next few minutes, we're going to get a chance to see some videotape. We're going to get a chance to visit some classrooms.
Classroom videos depict real-world examples of research-based practices.
A little bit, you just start it over again and try it again.
So I would take the book before
And collaborative sessions encourage teachers to reflect on their own practice and plan activities they can take back to their classrooms.
I thought that was quite interesting too. I think I'd like to use something like that in my classroom next year.
You really pick up a lot just by watching and listening.
A money box.
In today's session, teachers examine the daily routines that help them to assess their students' literacy abilities and behaviors.
The fact that he can spell writing with a W-R is pretty impressive.
What needs do you notice here? Go
Together,
ahead.
they explore the ways to use this assessment data to inform their instructional practice.
Assessment is consequential when what you learn from the assessment measures you use changes or informs what you're going to teach. At the outset, I want to say to you that we're going to differentiate what I would call large-scale assessment from classroom assessment. In today's world, we're asked to engage in all types and forms of assessment, and lots of it is considered, quote-unquote, high-stakes assessment. It's a phrase we hear a lot. Those types of tests tell us about trends in our classrooms, trends in our schools, trends in our districts, and that information is very unreliable in telling us about the individuals we teach. Most of the teachers in today's classrooms learned to assess through fairly formal instruments, and those are really important and valuable measures. But in addition to those measures, good teachers assess children within the context of daily instructional routines. If I want to know what I should plan next week for Adrian, if Adrian's in my classroom, I have to pay attention to what Adrian did on classroom activities. In making instructional decisions, I want to know how children are doing in response to what I'm teaching. Essentially, I want to know, are children learning what I've taught? That's what will help me guide day-to-day instruction in my classroom. So, I'm looking for classroom assessment that utilizes multiple measures. And what does that mean? Literacy is many things. So I need assessments that tell me how children do at the word level, how they do at the comprehension level, how they acquire and use language. I also need to know how they perform in different contexts. I want to know how they do when they read grade level text, how they do when they read text that's been matched to their level, how they do when they read text that they choose on their own. I want to know how they do if they read with me, the teacher, in a small group, and I want to know how they do if they read with a friend or on their own. When we say that effective instruction utilizes multiple measures, what we mean is that the assessments we use are both multiple in nature, word knowledge, comprehension, writing, and multiple in context. They look across different literacy tasks and contexts. Now, to say that assessment is embedded in the instructional context means that teachers don't set aside separate periods for assessment, because assessment happens as they're teaching. It's part of the very teaching act. Assessment is continuous when teachers continually gather information, day to day to day and week to week to week. Realistically, what you probably do is gather weekly data on the children about whom you have some very serious questions. And maybe you gather monthly data or bi-weekly data on children who are less of a challenge to you. To say that assessment is consequential in future learning tasks means simply this. To the extent that you gather assessment data and file it in a folder for the purposes of reporting, you're not meeting this particular principle. Assessment is consequential when teachers use it to inform instruction. Assessment is consequential when what you learn from the assessment measures you use changes or informs what you're going to teach. Anything less than that can only be termed evaluation. Okay? 4 very basic principles. Now, let's come over this way for a minute and take a look at this empty semantic map.
In filling out the semantic map, teachers consider the daily literacy routines that provide evidence of their students' word knowledge, fluency, language, comprehension, writing, and motivation and interest.
What are your current assessment practices? What counts as evidence for you when you go about the process of trying to learn about children and their literacy abilities and literacy behaviors? What counts as evidence of their word knowledge? What do you use right now? Lisa?
The first thing that popped into my mind was running records.
What does the running record tell you?
Are they skipping words they don't know? Strategies that I can infer that they're using. Are they looking at the beginning sound of a word? Are they trying to make sense? Are they just inventing words?
So it tells you about their word reading strategies, and I think you also said it tells you about their ability to construct meaning. Great. Who else? Adrian, what do you consider evidence?
Well, if I look back in the CUNY record, I might be able to find out some information about their word knowledge and their language, how much comprehension they have from a previous.
For you, what counts as evidence is a prior record on any of these?
Exactly.
All right. I agree that on entry to the 2nd grade, you might very much want to look back at the 1st grade record. But let's now make the assumption it's the 2nd or 3rd or 4th week of 2nd grade. How do you determine that children are learning or have learned what you're teaching or have taught?
Maybe I'll even speak with a colleague that they go to, a specialist teacher, and see how they're doing in that particular classroom, say computer or art or what have you.
Okay.
And we can, talk back and forth and see.
Okay. I'm just going to sort of call this general information. as opposed to these separate categories. And you will consult
The different teachers that they interact with other than myself.
resource teachers, if you will.
All right.
Makes good sense. Go ahead, Kemp.
You could also gain evidence from having a teacher and student conference about their reading or about their writing, you know, as you're about to have them work on an assignment.
That could tell you about their writing.
Their comprehension, sure.
It could tell you about comprehension.
Motivation, interest, I would imagine.
Could tell you about motivation, interest.
I'm looking at fluency also, because I mean, in terms of if you pull that child over to have that individual, you know, I want to listen to you read at this point. I'm considering that the conference, just sort of whenever you pull the child individually to read, to look at their writing, to discuss their assignment, whatever that is.
So I'm putting it everywhere, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead, Jody.
If I am visiting with a first grader at the beginning of the year and I want to find out more about their word knowledge, I may do a variety of things. I'm going to have them do some writing for me. I may have them...
Writing to learn what?
I may have them write words that they know how to spell. I may find out their knowledge of how words look and how you combine letters to put words together. I may also have them read a list of sight words. And then based on that, I may do additional assessment. If I find that the child is reading, I may do a running record, or I may pull some more formal but less formal than a standardized measure, like I use the reading inventory to gauge the level at which a reader is at.
May I ask you a question? You're using this informal reading inventory for word knowledge and for anything else?
I would be using it for comprehension as well. There are questions that are factual questions, that are inferential questions, evaluative questions, and that would tell me if the child can understand more of the higher level thinking.
Does anyone have strategies that they're using right now that provide evidence of children's language? Go ahead, Maynardo.
I do use anecdotal record.
Say more about that. What do you mean by an anecdotal record?
Actually, you keep jotting down everything that you observe, because we know that assessment, you're always assessing, no matter what you're doing.
What are you writing about? What are you watching? You watching...
The behavior. How the child arrive into that kind of thinking. What is he showing at that moment? It could be in a different situation. If he's reading that reading behavior, the conversation that he make with the classmates.
Okay, so observations of the child reading?
Mm-hmm. Talking and work in particular.
Okay. I'm going to scoot us on here to fluency. The only indication of fluency we have so far is in a teacher-student conference. How else do you observe children's fluency? Go ahead, Robin.
During shared reading times, if children have an opportunity to read, in my classroom that might be reading a sentence of the morning message or helping to read the daily poem, but I know people do all different things. Can I sneak one into the general information gathering too?
Sure.
Talking to parents, I find always very helpful.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to leave this open and hope that we'll return to it after each of our small group discussions today and again at the end of the workshop. I want you to think about... What I observed was a tendency for teachers to speak in generalities about children's abilities and about their assessment routines. And I think that's very common. And I also think that's very problematic, because to the extent that we cannot articulate the types of evidence we use on a day-to-day basis, we will be bound by more formal assessments. And the more formal assessment, generally, the less congruent it is with the child's day-to-day experiences. And the less congruent it is with the child's day-to-day experiences, often the less trustworthy it is a measure of what the child really knows and does. As we make the transition now into the video, I want you to think about and really try to focus on daily classroom routines. What are the daily instructional routines that provide evidence of what children know and do? And what types of assessment practices do you observe?
Where's Molly today? Where'd she go? Kid watching is what I do. Oh, Molly, now what are you reading? Every day I focus on 2 children specifically. That allows me to get to all of my children in a 2-week time frame.
Who was the owl with eyes so bright? Who was the owl? Don't know that word.
Let's try that together. It's the noise that he makes. I'm looking for what strategies and behaviors they're showing me in reading and writing. That tells me what they already know. I'm also looking for areas they might not be sure of yet, strategies they're not using or areas of confusion. Wow. Molly, you did an amazing job on that. If I can watch 2 children in every element throughout the day, I can go home tonight and prepare a lesson that will address their needs immediately tomorrow.
I teach the routine of morning meeting by modeling. I do it myself for a few days.
Choices. Chicken nuggets.
And I think it's important that all kids get in that role of being the leader.
Salad roll.
You know, sometimes people don't believe they take lunch in attendance at 1st grade, but I think, you know, if we give them a challenge, they rise to it.
Who's ordering chicken nuggets?
I get to set up, get ready for the day during that time, listen to kids read.
Who's ordering chicken nuggets?
DW had a problem. The Tibble twins are visiting again, and they're driving me crazy, she said.
Would you say that that book was easy, hard, or just right for you to read?
Just right.
Okay.
When they return the book that they read at home, they look around the room, they choose a new book.
And what did you think?
Sometimes I'll say, oh, you know, that's a little too easy. You know, you've got 3 books that you read that are very easy. Why don't you take one that's a little bit more challenging?
Good. Can you tell me some more?
Because it's kind of funny because now the Tibble twins, Arthur has to babysit them at his house, and DW gets freaked out because she has
A lot of the boys like the nonfiction books. Sometimes if all the books are nonfiction, I might steer them into reading another genre. I might say, you know, you read, the last 5 books you read were these kind of books. What about, this kind of a book?
Okay, William, what we're going to be doing is you're going to read a little bit to me, not the whole book, and we're going to do a running record on the grade and see how you do with it, okay? Remember, when I put a check, it means you get the words right. And if you see me write something down, we'll talk about it after, okay? We're just going to read a couple pages. You don't need to do the whole thing.
I, Nate the Great, and my dog Sledge were taking a walk. We walked too far. We walked to Rosamond's house.
Nate the Great is a typical K book, and he read it perfectly.
Sitting on.
He read it with expression. He knew to pause and the correct punctuation when he said, I, Nate the Great.
In front of her house. My future is worth more than 2 cents. I said 3 cents, then Rosamond said. She gazed into her crystal.
He self-corrected any mistakes he had. And even the word gaze, where he put a short A on it, the second time he read it, he corrected it himself.
Gazed into her crystal ball again. I can tell you more, she said. Someone has lost a box, a money box. You have to look for it. A money box, I said. How much money is in it? No money, Rosamond said. It's empty. Empty? Yes, it's my box.
Nice job. You can stop right there because you read 3 pages, and that should give us a good sample. Let me show you what this is. Look at all the checks. This is a level K. Last time we did this level K, you had a lot of words that you said wrong. William is moving right along. I believe that 6 weeks he'll probably be reading at an M, which is end of 2nd grade.
And I use Dear Time for a couple of things. One of them is for me to monitor the self-selections that they're doing. Are they choosing books that are appropriate? Are they choosing books that are too easy for them? Are they choosing books that are too difficult for them? It also gives me an insight into the kinds of things that they like. Yeah, what kind of stuff we need to learn from this book? Let me see what it is.
People who get, these two kids get lost in the woods.
Lost in the woods. Have you ever been in the woods?
Yeah.
You have? Have you ever been lost in the woods?
No.
No. So this is something new that you're going to learn about. One of the things that I saw you doing, though, when you went to the library, you chose this book, I saw you looking through it, making sure that you could read it. At first it seemed a little difficult, I saw you, but then you said to yourself, I'm going to try. Beatriz just recently started to read in English, and for her to pick up a chapter book and to be able to read, she pretty much read all of it and she wants to read it. Again, that gives me another little opportunity to assess her.
I was very young. I couldn't understand what happened. I only understand that there was a terrible hole in...
Let's go back to that terrible hole.
Terrible hole in the world.
Look at you. Beatriz, you know what's interesting about this? Just the other day, you were reading simple little books, and look at you've picked up now a chapter book, and you've made that decision on your own. Good.
Okay, now, as you go into your small groups, I want to ask you to focus your conversation on the instructional routines and the types of assessment that the teachers used embedded in the context of ongoing instruction and ongoing daily activities. Okay, get started.
It was neat the way, I guess it was Valerie, was able to weave her assessment into her regular day by having the kids take care of more of the housekeeping aspects to free her up.
Very independent, yeah.
And a lot of the things that I have seen too is it happened in an instant. She does not have, they don't have to assign the specific time to do it. It's just like, come here, sit down with me and do this in a quick, timely manner.
Apart from the kindergarten teacher, Sheila Owen, and the one we already talked about, it was hard to tell in some of them what the rest of the kids were doing. I mean, Jeannie was saying it's built into the day, and I believe that, but we didn't have the opportunity on the tape to see
what's going
what
on.
part of the day it was, because you just mostly saw that one teacher.
With Valerie, you could, because she said, while I'm doing this, I let them take attendance and do the lunch count. And so you knew exactly what was going on.
That's something I have trouble with, even in a small group, because...
how do you manage something like that?
Exactly. You just always want to be circulating and helping kids.
Something I noticed that was in common with all the kids that we saw in the video, besides the kids who were being assessed, all the other ones were so independent in what they were doing. And I think that was key in being able to take the kids aside and work with them. Because I know when I'm doing my assessment at times, I have kids come to me, what do I do now? I'm finished. Interrupting me, little things like that, and that didn't happen there. And that goes back to setting the routines in order to be able to work with individual kids.
My question was, most of these sounded like evaluations, not assessments. Sheila Owen was kid watching, and she watches 2 children every other week, the whole day. And she actually said, I take the information home with me, and I think about it carefully, and I immediately prepare a lesson that will address the issue.
Okay, that's
now
assessment.
That's real assessment.
Right.
The others were more evaluations.
Well, I disagree with that, because I think with the running records, that's driving her instruction. She's seeing where he's at, like you said, well, you did much better with this book than we did last time, do you remember? So maybe now she knows she can move on to something a little harder for him.
I bet that these people who are doing running records will do a similar thing later in the week with the results of the running record.
I don't think we got to see it on the video.
Right.
We just saw the assessment part of it. We didn't see how it drove their instruction. Maybe that was the probably the next step.
Right. But very often, I will evaluate children and do running records and know where they stand And it's a natural assumption that the next day I'm going to work
That's
on this,
driving
this,
your
and this.
instruction, isn't it?
Yeah, but it doesn't always seem as immediate as Sheila made it to be, is that the very next day I'm going to plan a lesson on such and such and such and such.
And I think that's very difficult to do. I don't think all of us can do that.
I think we do it all the time.
It's hard,
yeah, that's
though.
true.
I mean, if
unconsciously
kids are
almost.
forgetting periods, and you're just not even writing anything down. You're noticing that in the writing, a lot of kids are forgetting periods. You're going to do a mini lesson on periods without even.
You're right.
You might not write it down, and you might not
Like
say
you said, it's
one person.
unconsciously, but Sheila was real conscious
about it.
of working on that particular missing.
She definitely took it to the next level almost, the way she did it, absolutely.
Okay, let's reconvene. Now, there are a couple of things we want to accomplish in this large group discussion. I, of course, want to hear what you talked about in your small groups. I want to hear how it relates to what you do or hope to do based on what you observed and talked about on a day-to-day basis. And I want to return to questions. What new questions were raised as a result of your viewing and your conversations? So, what were the routines that fed into the assessment process for the teachers you observed? Who will start? Go ahead, Kemp.
I noticed that some of the teachers did some of their assessment with daily routines, like the morning chart, the morning opening routines they do. The kindergarten teacher had a little girl at the wall reading something about the owls, and just sort of like taking informal assessment without a running record, but just sort of things that happen in class where you could just get information.
So, if I were to add to this, Kemp, we would add word knowledge could come from the morning message.
Morning routine, yeah.
Could the teacher acquire any other information about children's literacy from the morning message?
The child's verbal skills, saying what's on the list and asking, his peers, his or her peers.
So you could learn about language from the morning messages.
I would
You
say.
listen to that child, ask questions, seek more information. You learn about how the child uses language from the morning message.
Is able to verbally respond to a question, even.
Okay, great. What else? Virtually any behavior during the school day could provide some insight into a child's literacy, performance and literacy knowledge and literacy interests. What the effective teacher needs to do is to develop some framework, some system for collecting and making sense of that data. So what did some of the other groups talk about? What were the observed routines?
We were particularly struck by Valerie and the way that she was able to hand off what might typically be considered teachers' responsibilities to the children. On the one hand, that was great for the children, and then it also freed her up to use that time just to read one-on-one with kids.
So relate it to assessment for me.
She had created a routine that allowed her to do that.
There you go.
It's just that she put things in place that allowed the children to be independent enough to free her up to work one-on-one with the child.
Yeah, and a common question that teachers ask all the time is, when am I going to find the time for running records? How can I find the time for running records? So Valerie put in place this morning routine, shifted responsibility from teacher to student, and that gave her the time to do the running records she wanted to do. Okay, there was another comment. Cruz?
One of the things that she did do with that particular student is that she, at the end of her assessment, said to the student after he read the book on Arthur, she said, "Would you say that was easy, hard, or just right to read?" And he said that was just right to read. And this gave her an idea how this student can self-monitor.
Where does it fit, Cruz, on our chart? If you...
Comprehension, I would say motivation and interest, and even fluency.
And why would you call that a measurement of fluency?
He was reading to her.
Oh, the running record itself was a measure of fluency. Okay. Jody?
When I was watching Stacy on the tape, working with a little boy and doing a running record, she explained to him what she was doing, what those check marks meant, and that she was going to go back to the text after the running record was over to talk about some of the things that she might want to work on with him. So not only do you have an assessment piece, but you also have an instructional moment to go back and talk about those miscues that the child may have made.
Yeah, very explicit, very informative, sort of child and teacher as co-investigators, co-assessors. All right, I want to ask if there are assessment questions that are sort of nagging you right now. Go ahead.
During our little conferencing time, the questions that I think we all had was, how much do you assess? When do you assess? Because it seems like you can get a journal of your own with these assessments if you assess every single thing. And then
These are not small questions, Adrian.
Also, the time. Time was a factor as well.
When to find the time
when
to
find the
assess
time to do it.
children.
Okay.
And what is it for?
And why?
And why?
Can I just write and
who?
why?
All the question words.
Okay. As we move to the next video, let me set you up for it a little bit. You're going to see one teacher, Hildy, working with one child, Cassandra, over a number of assessment sessions, sometimes within the classroom context, but sometimes in what we might consider a clinical setting, a one-to-one assessment for the purpose of gathering some in-depth information about one child. So take a look at what you see. Remember that you're only seeing bits and pieces. You're not seeing all that Hildy does with this child. But based on what you see here, what does Hildy learn and what questions about Cassandra's literacy go unanswered?
How do you know it says crocodile?
C.
And the C makes what sound? Like Cassandra and crocodile. I need to know what skills they bring into the classroom, what they know already, what they still need to learn. Maybe those expectations for the end of kindergarten, some of the kids haven't achieved. So where do I need to begin with every single child? So I'm going to ask you to start reading right here.
A.
I always begin the year with doing assessments the first 2 weeks of school.
No.
Okay, no problem.
At. And. My. Can. Do. Go. He. And. I. Is.
Do you know this one?
I don't know.
You don't know this one.
Like. My. And. My. No.
Cassandra, you knew a lot of them. And she knew about 20 of those first 24 words, which is good. And then I gave her a second group of words. The words are slightly harder. What is that word?
You.
She knew about 4, which is fine. The benchmark was those first 24 words.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to read, "Where is my hat?" Make sure you use your finger, Cassandra.
Where is my hat? Said Ben. Ben looked under his bed. Is not here, he said. Mom looked in his trumpet. Is not here, she said.
It was really interesting watching her read the text in the developmental reading assessment. She's using picture cues. She actually predicted a lot while she was reading.
Mom looked under the couch. Here is, she said.
Good job. So Cassandra, what is this book about?
About Ben's hat.
What about Ben's hat? What happened to Ben's hat?
His dog was sleeping on his hat.
Her comprehension, she was able to give me a retelling of the story too, which is important. Cassandra, do you think you're a good reader?
Yes,
Yes. Why?
because I learned to read.
Because you learned to read? You feel like you learned to read quick? Cassandra is a typical beginning first grade reader. So actually I can go back to the mother right now and say, you know, Cassandra's actually not below where she needs to be. Cassandra is exactly where she needs to be in first grade. Cassandra, I think she's very enthusiastic about school, and she's very enthusiastic about learning how to read and becoming a better reader.
Please let me have the car, Father Bear said.
You know, she plays it a little bit safe. I've never seen her pick up like a new book on her own. She's always picking up the books that are familiar to her, that she knows she can read. Pushing her to try new books is one thing that I always do with her. Okay, now, what you guys are gonna do is I want everyone to read this page silently, and when you are done, you can look at me. Read this page, yeah, read this page silently.
And Mother Bear and Baby Bear went out to the farm.
Cassandra has a lot more strategies now when she reads.
The three bears went inside. Baby Bear ran down steps.
Okay, let's see what makes sense. You know down, right? So, Baby Bear ran down
stairs.
You can see her trying to sound out words.
Is Father Bear's bed. This is Mother Bear's bed. This is my bed, he said.
You can see her self-correcting when something doesn't make sense, using picture cues and context cues to figure out a word.
And today.
Why don't you read this sentence again?
Let's move in today.
So she definitely has more strategies to rely on while she reads.
So what did you think? What do you know about Cassandra based on what you saw, and how do you know it?
I could see that at the very beginning of first grade that Cassandra was on first grade level. She was able to use picture clues in order to figure out words. She could answer generally what the book was about, so it showed she had evidence of comprehension. She was able to tell a little bit more detail about the book.
And how did you know she had comprehension?
She answered a question when Hildy said, "What is this book about?" I wasn't sure if it was accurate, but I think it was.
Okay. Remember earlier in the lecture, we talked about multiple measures. So one measure of comprehension is the child's ability to answer a teacher's questions.
Right.
And we know from that Cassandra could answer the questions about that book. Okay, keep going.
What I noticed when she was tested again is that her fluency had improved greatly from having actually heard her read the first time and hearing her read the second time. She seemed to have more confidence. She seemed to
take the risk of making sense of a word when she didn't know what downstairs was. She and Hildy gave her a cue or clue, and Cassandra was able to say downstairs pretty confidently. So her confidence had grown. And then, of course, I heard Hildy say again that Cassandra had many, many more strategies to use now to read and was using those strategies. Okay, Kristen, you're going to add to that?
I was going to agree with what Marcy said, that she made tremendous progress throughout that year. In the beginning, when she was reading Where Is My Hat, she was using picture clues because she said the trumpet, but she wasn't using initial consonant. So she wasn't looking at that. And she also wasn't paying attention to meaning because she said said instead of she said, or something like that. It didn't make sense. And then in the end, it was evident she was self-correcting. She was noticing her errors. She'd notice little chunks in words. I thought that was tremendous progress.
Okay, anyone want to add to that? Go ahead, Maynardo.
I think she spent a lot of time reading in between because the length of the text on the last segment are longer. She was reading harder text.
Okay. What didn't you know? If you were Cassandra's teacher, what additional information do you need, and how would you go about getting it? Go ahead, Kemp.
As I watched, I wanted a writing sample. I didn't have much of a sense of how she used word knowledge when she was doing her own writing. So I would be looking for some evidence in her writing.
So you would collect a writing sample, and from the writing sample, what could you learn?
I would get a sense of her phonemic awareness. I would get a sense of her her organizational planning for how she went about using pencil, paper. Obviously, left to right sweep was evident in her reading, but I'd be curious about those kinds of things about her writing.
Okay. Great. Go ahead, Marcy. I knew that Cassandra had basic, concrete knowledge. I didn't hear any evidence that she was able to make any inferences. Okay, so how would you find that out? I think I would ask her further questions after I've used the DRA, and I know that there are specific questions you can ask, but very often I'll ask a little bit more. And also, there weren't any questions that related to her experience. So I couldn't tell the motivation there. She really liked the story. Okay. Go ahead, Jody.
I'm not sure if Cassandra is the type of reader who chooses to read when it is not sustained silent reading time. And if she's not, then perhaps it would be helpful to find out what her interests are and using those interests to introduce her to different types of books. Since
How might her teacher do that? How would you do that, Jody, if she were in your classroom?
I might have a conference with her, have a little interview. I would just ask her what are some things that she likes, what are some things that she would like to know more about. And I might even say to her, you know, Cassandra, I'm noticing that you like books that you know a lot about, that you're comfortable with, but I would like to try to introduce you to different types of books. And hopefully she would give me an indication of what she's interested in and what she likes, and then I can pull from that.
Okay, go ahead, Kristen.
I think one of the most valuable things that we can do with our kids is just get to know them really with no agenda. You might have an agenda once you have the information, but getting to know them on the playground, getting to know them in the 5 minutes before the bell rings in the morning while they're unpacking, seeing what they do after school. You might know at that point, I'm sure every teacher knows what a child's interests are after getting to know them for a couple of weeks.
And all of that information can feed into literacy instruction, because literacy for me in my classrooms happens all day long. And so I need to know not just how skilled the child is at word study and how skilled the child is at comprehension, but I also need to know that child really well. I need to know the child's interests and activities and likes and dislikes, because all of that can help me direct the child's literacy and support the child's literacy. So you're absolutely right. Getting to know that child in very personal ways is very important in assessment. All right, I'm going to tell you some of the things I wished I could have learned as I was watching Cassandra. I thought that I wanted to know a whole lot more about comprehension. Comprehension questions tell me what children know, what children can recall in response to questions. But in real life, when you read, somebody's not always there to pose a question for you. So I really want to know how children recall text on their own. What do they recall without the aid of questions? I would also like the opportunity to see the children with whom I work in small, student-led book talks. I'd like to see the way they talk about books when there's no teacher in the mix. What do they talk about? Do they stay on the topic? Do they accurately recall what the author wrote? Do they make up the story as they go along? Do they relate it to their own lives? What do they talk about when there's no teacher there to direct, to guide, indeed to lead the discussion? I agree with Kemp. I would love to have seen some writing samples. And the writing samples can tell me a lot about their ability to spell, about their letter-sound association knowledge, about their ability to use language, to construct grammatically correct sentences, to appropriate language from books and stories in their own writing. Looking at children's writing can tell me a lot about their literacy. We're going to shift gears, and in the next activity you're going to have an opportunity to look at some student samples, analyze them, and as a group we'll talk about them. You'll find them in your folder.
Teachers spend a few minutes reviewing a running record and a piece of writing from a first grade student's end-of-year portfolio.
We notice a lot of conventional forms.
They discuss what these samples suggest about the student's literacy strengths and needs.
So they are limited, but based on those work samples, what do you know about Will? What are his strengths and what are his needs?
What I think I know about Will from the writing piece is that he's able to write words with a conventional type of spelling. The word writing and the word reading.
Okay.
He has the way he has it spelled is about correct.
Okay. Well, is it about, because spelling isn't almost right. Does he know how to spell these words or not?
He has a great start at it. He may be missing a letter here and there, but.
All right. So he's approaching standard
and
spelling.
he's doing great.
He's approximating standard spelling. Okay. Then I may have misrepresented it here when I put uses conventional spelling.
But he does.
He does.
Like in the word am and good and math. I mean,
like that.
Right. So there's some evidence of some conventional spellings, and there are close approximations of some more difficult words.
Words, yes.
Okay, go ahead, Ruth.
He seems to have a pretty good knowledge of punctuation.
So he has punctuation, and what's the evidence, Ruth?
Well, in the greeting, he has a comma after the teacher's name, Cavell. He has most of his periods. And he also knows when a sentence begins and when a sentence ends, and that's very difficult at this level.
Great. Great. Go ahead, Marcy.
He varies his sentence structure.
So I want to put that with writing?
You could put it with writing.
Okay.
This is a letter to a grade 2 teacher, so it's the end of grade 1. I think this is a really good sample. I think it's pretty sophisticated, actually. And the fact that he can spell writing with a W-R is pretty impressive.
Okay. Kristen?
I think he must read a lot because he knows a lot of endings like ing and shun, T-I-O-N, for attention. And he knows that writing starts with a W. He's transferring that onto the word reading. He started reading with a W. And the word deer is D-E-R-E. He might know how to spell here, so he's using transfer skills for that. It might indicate that he has transfer skills. I don't know for
Or
sure.
maybe that he's spelling by analogy, which is an important reading and writing skill. What needs do you notice here? Go ahead, Robin.
just taking a quick peek at the running record and at the errors that he made, it looks like in his reading that he's paying close attention to initial letters in words, but his errors don't look like they make a lot of sense. Like he said run for rap, and he said loved for lived. So at least that would be a question about reading comprehension.
So how would you express that as a reading need?
To develop some other strategies for reading unknown words other than just looking at first letter, and also better ability to self-correct errors based on meaning.
All right, so I'm going to put sense making.
Right. That's why it raised for us a concern about comprehension.
Okay. All right. Any other needs, Jody?
I basically want to elaborate a little bit on what Robin just said, and actually this might be in a strength of Will's in comprehension. As I'm looking at the running record, I noticed that he goes back to the beginning of the sentence and repeats his reading. So that is a strength, because he is realizing at some point that it's not making sense. So he's reading for meaning, but somehow he's making these miscues. He's mispronouncing words, and it looks like he's looking at the first letter and then guessing. So so we might want to do some additional word work to help him look for patterns in words and using words that he knows.
Okay, and essentially we need to discourage him from guessing based on the first letter sound. Okay, based on what you viewed, what you talked about, Will's samples, your own experiences. Anything we want to add to this chart at the end of the day?
I was just thinking about writing, and something we didn't mention was a rubric. I know that my favorite way to assess my students is to, during our writer's workshop conference, teacher conference, I do the rubric with them. Asking them, did you leave spaces between your words? Do you have a period at the end of your sentence? Did you spell word while words correctly? How did you do with invented spelling? Did you try hard to hear all the sounds? And I let them tell me, yes, I did that. Did you add detail to your picture? And that's a valuable form of assessment for me, but it also lets them go back and look and say, oh no, I didn't add periods, and they remember that next time.
In talking about a rubric, Kristen, you're talking about one strategy for making sense of those student work samples within a portfolio, and it's a very important part of the assessment process. Go ahead, Adrian.
What about giving the child a chance or time to actually share?
And what do you learn? So let's put this up here. Sharing tells you about what?
It can tell me their feelings, what they were.
So it can tell you something about motivation and interest?
If they comprehended what they were supposed to be.
It can tell you something about comprehension.
Yes. And fluency, well, if they're sharing, that means they're talking, so we're listening.
So there's some, at least language fluency.
Exactly.
If we categorize this as both reading fluency and language fluency, then that sharing time can tell you about their language fluency. Okay.
We had language there and
and it can tell us about language.
Yes.
Okay, so we can put that in both places. Great. I want to turn to your questions one more time. How much assessment, when to assess, what to assess, time to assess, and why to assess? Really tough questions. Let me try to answer them quickly. How much assessment? We need to collect enough evidence so that we understand the child and can plan for that child. Once we start finding the same type of information over and over and over and over again, we know we have enough. I mean, it's rather simplistic. When to assess? Ongoing. Ongoing. At the start of the year, you want some baseline data, and then you want to be able to have some benchmarks along the way. Now, with your lowest performing children, you want that assessment more frequently so that you can constantly ratchet up the instruction. What to assess? multiple literacies. You need to know how well children can read words. You need to know how well they can respond to what they read. You need to know how well they can write. You need to know how well they can speak. You need to assess the range of literacies. Time to assess, for me, that's the easiest. When assessment is embedded in instruction, you don't need additional time to assess. You need time to critique. You need time to analyze. But you don't need classroom time to assess. Why you assess? Because without good assessment data, you don't know what you're doing. Without the good assessment data, it's a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, and you can't do that because that's not going to serve any of your children well. So if we come back to our initial list, I think it's reasonably easy for teachers to use multiple measures when they have a good understanding of what literacy is. I think we can easily embed assessment in instruction. I think we can fairly easily make assessment continuous. For me, this is what's most difficult, because to make assessment consequential in future learning tasks, I have to find time to make sense of my assessment data. And if I don't make time to make sense of the data, none of this matters. It looks good. I can show off some really great portfolios, but unless I can prove that that evidence is consequential, it hasn't taken me anywhere.
I'm very comfortable with assessing children. The piece that was important to me from our workshop today was what to do with that information. I don't know that every piece of information I have always is conveyed into a lesson, and the workshop today reaffirmed the importance of using it daily for your instruction.
I hope we have created new questions while we've answered some old questions, and I hope that you'll just continue to read and read and read and experiment and try some new ideas and try to improve upon what I'm sure are already some very good assessment practices in your classroom. Thank you.
Annenberg Media. For information about this and other Annenberg Media programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.